Hello and welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion. I am Ladi Akiriduluale. The headlines. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky insists on meeting with his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin to reach a compromise. U.S. President Joe Biden says Mr. Putin's back is against the wall in Ukraine as he plans to visit Poland. Plus, a new curfew is in effect in Kyiv, lasting until Wednesday morning, as the mayor warns of more Russian shelling of the Ukrainian capital. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is insisting that it would not be possible to negotiate an end to the war in his country without a meeting with his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin. He made this known in his daily video address to the country. Mr. Zelensky also says it will not be possible to decide at such a meeting what should be done with Russian-occupied territories in Ukraine. The Ukrainian president said any compromises agreed with Russia to end the war would need to be voted on by Ukrainians in a referendum. Meanwhile, Mr. Zelensky says his country's forces have managed to keep Russia far at bay. In a video message, Mr. Zelensky said while the Russians have been trying to, quote, slowly advance, their efforts have so far been repulsed and their forces restrained. Mr. Zelensky also claims that another Russian aircraft had been brought down by Ukrainian forces in the Kharkiv region, even as Ukraine military says Russian forces have increased their aviation presence in Ukraine's airspace in the past 24 hours. With regards to the humanitarian crisis, Ukraine says a further 8,000 people were evacuated from conflict zones yesterday. Deputy Prime Minister says this included around 3,000 people from the besieged city of Mariupol. Mr. Zelensky is set to virtually address the Japanese parliament today to rally international support for his country's fight against the Russian invasion. His speech, expected to be for about 10 minutes, will be shown in a meeting room at the lower house, the more powerful of Japan's two-chamber parliament, which Prime Minister Fumio Kishida belongs to. And U.S. President Joe Biden has given his strongest warning yet that Russia may be preparing to use chemical and biological weapons in Ukraine. According to Mr. Biden, the Russian President Vladimir Putin is, quote, against the wall. He made this known at a business roundtable event, adding that Russia's false accusation that Kyiv has biological and chemical weapons illustrates that Putin is considering using them himself in his war against Ukraine. However, the president did not provide any evidence of this. Meanwhile, the Pentagon is accusing Russian forces of committing war crimes in Ukraine and said it would help gather evidence of them as it accused the Kremlin of carrying out indiscriminate attacks as part of an international strategy in the conflict. Here's Pentagon spokesperson John Kirby.
Time to take some questions, and then we'll do a briefing from there. With that, I'll turn it over to Anne.
Thank you, Jen. Good afternoon, everyone. We've previously warned about the potential for Russia to conduct cyber attacks against the United States, including as a response to the unprecedented economic costs that the U.S. and allies and partners imposed in response to Russia's further invasion of Ukraine. Today, we are reiterating those warnings, and we're doing so based on evolving threat intelligence that the Russian government is exploring options for potential cyber attacks on critical infrastructure.
Do you think the U.S. banking system...
Thank you, Anne, so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And it seems the Russians are fighting the numerous sanctions imposed on them, with senior White House cyber security official Ann Neuberger saying the U.S. government has seen, quote, preparatory Russian hacking activity aimed at numerous U.S. companies, but it has no certainty such an attack will occur. The government is advising U.S. companies that provide critical infrastructure that they should improve their cyber defensive posture because of ongoing digital threats from Russia. Mr. Neuberger said the administration recently provided classified briefings to hundreds of U.S. companies that may be targeted by Russian hackers. The White House also published a written statement yesterday from the president where he warned that Moscow may lash out with cyber attacks because of the unprecedented economic costs imposed on the country. The warning, according to Mr. Neuberger, is based on evolving threat intelligence. Let's talk now to Stephen Hayes. Stephen was former president of the American Center for International Leadership, which was focused on U.S.-Soviet matters at the height of the then Cold War. He has made about 40 trips to the USSR, as it was then known, and now into the 15 republics that emerged from there. His last trip to Russia was in 2019, just before the COVID outbreak. So, Stephen, nice to speak to you. Welcome. I know the timing is really bad, but thank you for your time.
Yes, good morning, and certainly very good morning here. It's very late or very early, a little different, so thank you. It's nice to be here.
Are you surprised that any of the exchanges between the U.S. and Russia give the kind of impression that we're back at the Cold War? Some of the rhetoric is reminiscent of that period, isn't it?
Well, it's somewhat surprising because I think people normally think that life just is a progression and it gets better as you go along. And I think we have come back to almost a full circle and are very close to another Cold War. In fact, I think the situation seems to me right now more dangerous now than it was at almost any point in the Cold War, with the exception of perhaps the Cuban Missile Crises. I think the whole world is facing a crisis now, and this really needs to be solved as soon as possible.
Given the scenario that you just painted, that the situation is more dangerous now than it was, even at the height of that, and given some of the work that you did during that period to bring this to an end, today, that all the parties in this, do they come out having learned any lessons, having given the indication that any lessons were learned from that episode?
This is a great frustration for me because I spent a considerable part of my life, at least a younger part of it, for a couple of decades working on this, and it felt very good that after 90 and perestroika that things would progress, the relationships would grow, and we were going to be able to address global issues collectively. And that simply has not happened. I think Putin has taken it back to the Cold War, and I think that's partly his own background that has made this, in hindsight, perhaps inevitable, because he is what is known as a Chekist, one of the people out of the history of Russia in the Tsar time, as well as during the Soviet Union when the intelligence apparatus ran the country, and I think that's what's happened again in Russia. And so I'm very concerned about that. And the difference now, too, is that the weaponry now is much more sophisticated than it was, say, in 1960, 1970. And this war could be used as a test for the so-called hyper missile that Putin says that Russia now possesses, a missile that can go under radar. So I think we are in very dangerous times.
Let's look at that a little bit. The West is squeezing Russia economically. Russia is squeezing the Ukraine economically and militarily. And the rest of the world is being squeezed by what is going on but from both sides. Again, it seems that we haven't learned the key lessons involved in all of this. Do you think this was a road that we didn't have to travel?
Yeah, I do. I do think that it was avoidable. I think that the discussion on NATO and Ukraine could have been handled much more diplomatically earlier. Whether Putin would have accepted that, I'm not sure. But I think almost any road to war is often could be avoided if the parties really wanted to. I think the problem here is that Putin has already seen Ukraine as part of Russia. In fact, when he first came in, he said the greatest mistake that was made was that when the Soviet Union was dissolved. And I think he clearly would like to see that come back together, and at least with Ukraine. And in fairness, Ukraine is the underbelly of Russia. So Putin can't see Ukraine as an ally or part of NATO, because then that cuts him off from the Black Sea, it cuts Russia off from the Black Sea. So I think diplomacy should have clicked in much earlier, and people should have understood what was at stake. Now, whether, again, the question in my mind is whether Putin really would have accepted that. He's still very reluctant to accept any negotiations. In fact, so far hasn't, and seems intent to either win or lose entirely, one way or another. And I think, to much of the world's surprise, certainly mine, Ukraine has held out far better than I anticipated.
Vladimir Putin's predecessor in office was Boris Yeltsin, and you took Yeltsin to the United States for his first trip, which would be one of the heights of diplomatic triumphs at the time. So when we talk diplomacy now, one of the things that's been affected by it immediately is trade, and that's an area in which you've worked extensively as well. The economic sanctions that have been imposed on Russia and the ripple-on effect, even in the United States, where gas prices have gone up recently and other products prices are also increasing, not to talk of the rest of the world. Again, the effect on trade is not going to benefit anyone. Do you think that would serve as a motivation to bring the parties, all the parties, back to the negotiating table?
Well, I think it's probably one of the few things we have to get people to the negotiating table now. I don't see any other incentives better than right now the economic incentive. The problem is that sanctions generally hurt the middle class and poor first before they hurt the leadership. The leadership can last a very long time under sanctions. So whether sanctions, they in and of themselves really solve the issue, I doubt. I'm more concerned with places like Africa, because I've worked in Africa for 20 years as the head of the corporate council in Africa as well. I think the economic problem is going to be one of Russia and Ukraine supply a very large percentage of Africa's agriculture, particularly wheat and corn, and that's simply not going to be flowing into Africa now. So I think there's major problems worldwide on that because of the economic issues. Sanctions in and of themselves, I am not necessarily in favor of sanctions in this case, except in extreme cases. This is clearly an extreme case, but it's a long-term solution. I think even the U.S. administration has said it's not going to change things right away. It's a long-term process.
This is a thin line for the African countries you mentioned, where you've worked. Africa is caught in the middle of this. Many African countries have good relationships with both Russia and with Ukraine, especially even when they were together under the USSR. Right. And now they're almost like they're being careful not to be caught on one side or the other. That has meant that the forecasts for trade growth and economic growth and so on the African continent has been brought down. The forecast has come down progressively over the last couple of weeks that this invasion started. What do you think, having worked with them, what do you think African countries can or should do to, turn this from lemons to lemonade, if that's the phrase?
It's going to be hard, because also a lot of African countries, including Nigeria, get some fertilizer supply out of Russia and Ukraine both, and so it's going to be hard. there is, you hate to look at economic advantages during these times when the war is going on, but where Africa can profit now is it, and I think the Europeans should also follow this, is see Africa more as a base for fuel rather than Russia. I think they need to invest more in Africa in terms of its energy, particularly natural gas, as well as oil. I think certainly Nigeria is already benefiting. You don't want to see anybody benefit under these circumstances, but Nigeria is benefiting. The price of oil now is over $100 a barrel. So in that case, you can, to use your analogy or metaphor, is that you can make lemonade from what's happening with the energy crises, because there is an energy crisis now too, and Europe was depending on the pipeline from Russia. So now they need to get right away their sources of oil and natural gas from other places, and I think Africa is one of the best places to do that. I think this should also drive Africa to looking at becoming more self-sustaining in its own agriculture production. I've always been an advocate of that Africa needs to grow its own food as much as it does import, and Africa could feed the world. So I think this might be an impetus for Africa to become more self-reliant in agriculture as well.
This might not have been one of the intended consequences of the sanctions and all the squeezing, but I alluded to it earlier on in the conversation where I talked about high gas prices, even in the United States itself. Do you think that public pressure, perhaps, could make Mr. Biden and his administration consider a less hardline, if you like, stance in this matter, and probably work desperately towards bringing Russia and Ukraine back to the table instead of giving the Ukrainian arms?
I think the U.S. Biden deserves some praise for the fact that I think he's handled the crises as best as he can right now. The gas prices themselves, I think, reflect some gouging because Russia only supplies 1% of all U.S. Energy needs, and that can be replaced very, very easily and very quickly. But yes, I think that high gas prices will eventually put more pressure on the Biden administration, particularly as the midterm elections approach. But I think right now the American people understand this and have been perhaps surprisingly in favor of willing to take this pressure. Now, how long they're willing to take that pressure at the gas tank, and it is pretty severe. It's going up about $1 a gallon for me as well. So whether they can take that pressure long term, I don't know. I hope they can. But right now, 78%. The polls show that 78% of the American people are supporting the Biden administration's stance on Ukraine, which also means that they understand why the gas prices are what they are. Although I do think that the oil companies have had their share of driving up the price too, because a 1% decrease doesn't really explain the oil prices going up as much as they have. Gasoline prices, I should say.
The history shows that Russians and Ukrainians are more or less brothers and sisters, and one of the traits that they have is that they are warriors, which is why there are affairs that this isn't going to be easy to bring to a close. President Zelensky of Ukraine is asking for a one-on-one personal meeting with Vladimir Putin, that this matter cannot be resolved without that happening. Do you think that's a wise strategy on his part, given the military facts on the ground, and possibly with the backing of a few other outsiders? Could this really bring this to an end if that meeting takes place?
I question whether, first of all, I think the meeting is important. I think that probably now is the best time for him to do that before there's before there's further Russian gains, and while at the same time the Ukraine army is held firm very well. So I think he's got some chips that he may not have in a few weeks. So I think now is the time to reach out. I think he needs to be very careful in that meeting and make sure he's protected as well, by the way. But I think it can only, you're right, it can only be resolved by face-to-face meeting with either their respective teams or they themselves. But I just don't think Putin is the type of person, based on, in part, all my experience in the old Soviet Union, which he is much more a part of than he is the modern Russia. I think Putin is unlikely to accept terms, because I think he also sees himself losing if he doesn't completely win this. I hope he doesn't win this.
Finally, I must ask this, and it's quite fascinating because it's Putin that ordered the invasion of Ukraine. You've talked about his background being more of the old Soviet than more of the new Russian. What kind of psychology do you think is driving him right now? Because in Russia, basically, he's the man to go to. It's not exactly the kind of democracy that is operated in the United States, is it?
Well, it's clearly not a democracy any longer. He's already said that traitors need to be eliminated, and that means demonstrators, everything else. He's going back to more a Stalinist model, and I think this in fact was a more historic model, which he's more comfortable with. I don't think there's a bit of Democrat or sympathy with democracy in his bones. I think that this is why I think we're in a particularly dangerous time, because of that mentality and that psychology. He is of the old KGB. He felt humiliated, as many others did, at a time when you remember that he started in the 1980s in the KGB, and that was at the time when Russia was seen as losing the Cold War. I never thought it should put it that way. It was an opportunity, really, to bring both sides together rather than declare winners and losers. And I think that he felt humiliated, and I think that's carried over. And I think his statement since he became head of the Soviet Union has just reinforced that. He feels that the old Soviet Union, the old Russian Empire, needs to be rebuilt, and that we need to respect Russia more, which I think is kind of silly, because I think Russia should be respected in any case. It's a great country. It has resources the rest of the world doesn't have in many cases, and yet there's this inferiority complex, or this anger about not having the same, being seen as one of the great powers any longer, that both China and the U.S. have surpassed that. I think that's unfortunate, but I think that's part of his mentality.
Stephen Hayes, it's been a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much for your time. And once again, have a very good morning. It's very, very early in Washington. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Okay. Thank you. It was an honor.
We'll take a break, and when we come back, we'll bring you other stories on this invasion. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back. European Union foreign ministers have met in Brussels amidst calls for some member states, from some member states that is, for sanctions on Russia to target its lucrative energy sector at the start of a week of intense diplomacy aimed at agreeing more steps against Moscow. The European Union and its Western allies have already imposed a range of sanctions against Russia over its invasion of Ukraine. The humanitarian crisis in the city of Mariupol is increasing pressure on Europe to do more.
The European Union and its Western allies have already imposed a range of sanctions against Russia over its invasion of Ukraine, including freezing its central bank's assets. The humanitarian crisis in the besieged port city of Mariupol is increasing pressure on Europe to do more. The foreign ministers of Lithuania and Ireland, at the start of a week of intense diplomacy, say the European Union should step up sanctions on Russia to target its lucrative energy sector.
Europe cannot look or give an impression of fatigue when the war in Ukraine has not ended. We cannot get tired imposing sanctions. We cannot get tired offering assistance and help to Ukraine.
Looking at the extent of the destruction in Ukraine right now, it's very hard, in my view, to make the case that we shouldn't be moving into the energy sector, particularly oil and coal, in terms of interrupting normal trade in that space.
But whether to target Russian oil, as the United States and Britain have done, is a tough and divisive choice for the 27-nation EU, which relies on Russia for 40% of its gas. Some diplomats say that the Baltic countries, including Lithuania, are pushing for an embargo as the next logical step, while Germany, which very much depends on Russian gas, is warning against acting too quickly because of already high energy prices in Europe.
We would also, from the Danish side, support the most possible, strongest sanctions that we can agree upon, including also, for example, access to seaports or overland for Russia and Belarusian transportation. But also other type of sanctions, we are ready to look at doing more because we need to stop this aggression.
For EU Foreign Policy Chief Josep Borrell, a massive war crime is happening at Mariupol, and Russia is doing a lot of war crimes.
Russia is really doing a lot of war crimes. That's the word. You have to say that. What's happening in Mariupol is a massive war crime, destroying everything, bombarding and killing everybody in an indiscriminated manner. This is something awful. We have to condemn in the stronger terms. This is a war crime, a massive war crime, what's happening in Mariupol. The city will be completely destroyed and people are dying.
Defense ministers will also discuss a strategic compass, a new EU military strategy meant to adapt the bloc to a new geopolitical reality. Russia invaded Ukraine on February 24. Putin has called Russia's actions a special operation meant to demilitarize Ukraine and purge it of what he sees as dangerous nationalists. Ukraine and the West say these are baseless pretexts for an aggressive war.
Let's talk now to Professor Khalifa Dikwa, who is of the Department of Linguistics, International Relations and Intelligence at the University of Maiduguri. He joins us from our Maiduguri studios. Good morning, Prof. It's nice to see you again.
Good morning, my dear. Nice to see you too.
Let me begin by giving you an opportunity to give us your quick take, just a summary at the very beginning of how this unfolded, Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Do you, like quite a number of other people, believe that this could have been avoided?
Yes, it could have been avoided if those who signed agreement in 1990, prior to the fall of Berlin Wall, this thing wouldn't have happened. It had to do with reneging of agreements, a gentleman's agreement in 1994 that few weeks prior to the collapse of the Soviet Union, of which the Russian Federation is the biggest part. So the EU promised not to move an inch, and that was with the agreement signed with even United States of America. And we dare say that, unfortunately, a big country like America, it is our country, I dare say, a country of the world, where citizens from all over the world succeed there. You go there for opportunities. But our people should make a difference between a government and the people of America. The government of America is mostly driven by a tiny GOP racist warmongers who will always ignite wars in order to sell arms and so on, just to fill up their own pocket. So they reneged on the movement towards the borders of Russia. At that time, they said not an inch will any West European countries will move towards the borders of the Russian Federation. 1994, 5 of them moved and were twisted to be members of the European Union in violation of the agreement. So Russia had been making noise, had been talking diplomatically not to do it because it was getting closer to it, threatening its security and so on. The last one that broke the back of the camel was the Ukraine that we are talking about. In Ukraine, you could see how America could do certain things and then sacrifice a country to go the way, and even ask the European Union countries to also play its own game. The entire thing, the entire game is between two ideologies, capitalism and others, socialism, whatever you call it, communism. And Ukraine is just the scapegoat. What you call it in French, bouc à panurge. So
let me interrupt you at this point and ask. Let me interrupt you, Professor Dikwa. My apologies. Let me interrupt you. My apologies. Let me interrupt you and ask now that, given the background you've already given, do you think that those who are saying that Ukraine does have the right to choose who its friends are simply being naive, knowing what is on ground in terms of realpolitik within the region? Or is it true that a country that is sovereign does have a right to pick its friends?
It was naive to have taken side, to have agreed to be incorporated into the EU, even NATO, which for some countries have been trying to get into it for over 20 years. It is not automatic, and therefore it was naive for the leadership to have taken that decision to fight its immediate neighbor and so on, and it is absolutely bad for it. It has to do with the militarization of Ukraine itself. And then for America, it is about truncating the rapprochement between the European Union and Russia, in that they get 41% of the gas from Russia, without which they will freeze to death. And secondly, to create problems for rapprochement between Europe and China as one of the economic giants next to America. It had to do with rivalry, not about a real thing. And you see now the repercussions is that America and Europe can just sacrifice any other country when it has to do with a big country with veto powers at the United Nations Security Council. And they are just watching, say, we are sending this, we are sending these arms, we are taking away Russia from the SWIFT financial system and so on. In actual sense, practically, about the 41% of gas and 20% of oil, they are still receiving from Russia behind the scene. And the same America that was punishing Venezuela for whatever it is, for not accepting the Speaker of the Parliament, is asking behind the scene to try to fill the gap that will be left by Russia. And it is not easy to build all this infrastructure within a very short time. And thirdly, Europe itself is actually now playing the rhetorics, doing it with just words, not actually doing it the way America wanted it. And you can see how propaganda works. It is always about vilifying the rival, vilifying the country that they wanted to invade. That was exactly what happened to Iraq with the pretext of a weapon of mass destruction. They never happened. They never existed. They invaded Iraq. They invaded Russia. They invaded Somalia, Libya, and so on. So what you hear from the mainstream media is actually weapons of propaganda in order to do the thing. And it is, even if I were the president of America, I will fight this thing, but diplomatically, because failing this Ukraine without putting something structure, it means the East now will have a better say with EU, real allies now making business, making deals with China, Russia, India, and so on, with a currency that is no longer dollars, right? Like rubles of Russia, like rupees of India, and even themselves will like to float their own euro currency away from the dollar, which is always used as sanctions, but with American interests alone. So European Union, all these European countries are now have now come to reality, to terms with the fact that it has always been for the interest of America that has never shown interest in protecting them in their own interests, and therefore they will have to look for alternative for the dollar. Dollar, how did it happen? It happened in the 70s when the CIA took down the King Faisal, who grounded America at that time with oil embargo. So, and insisted that Saudi Arabia did its bidding or sold oil with dollars, and that's how dollar got there, and no alternative there, with harassment, international deals, and so on, harassment whether other countries liked it or not, never an alternative beyond 83 years. It has gone now beyond this, and now what is on ground is that there is no way the rest of the world will avoid China, that has already built roads, rails, and so on, linking Europe to China, to Asia, linking Europe to Africa, East Africa, just the way you cannot ignore Nigeria if you are talking about Africa. Unfortunately, Africa itself, other smaller countries had to now find their own non-alignment to stay put, non-aligned, neutral, and so on. But Nigeria hurriedly joined the follow-follow thing in order to condemn Russia over it. Russia has no history of colonization or trade of blacks and so on. So Nigeria, I still believe that next time should not be taken side, because anybody, Nigeria should have its own friends, should choose its own friends. Like Mandela said, what the Western world their own error is that they always think that their own friends must be our friends. The people they hate must be also hated by us in Africa, in Nigeria, and so on. This is the mistake that this is being done. It is about
because of our time, Professor Dikwa, I still have one question that I must ask you. Many of the things you've spoken about, are things that will take time to unfold. And those who agree with you will say that, yes, in time that will happen. But right now, there is carnage going on. There is destruction of lives and property. I guess the key point is, how do we stop this now? What is to be done to stop this now?
Exactly. It ought not to have even started in the first place with Ukraine. If Ukraine had agreed to forget about being member of NATO, and then agreeing to demilitarize by not accepting the dumping of big weapons at the border of Russia, dumping of arms in Poland, all these things ought not to have happened. So Russia had to step up for its own security. Diplomacy will work. But the carnage that has been going on, what we call it carnage or massacre or genocide, the number of victims is not up to what it is being said there. And it has to do how we look at how the refugees are being treated in that place. Compare them to what happened in Russia, in Syria, Iraq, in Nigeria. We have more refugees, but this treatment had never occurred to us. It has to do with race and so on. And therefore, the media is all over Ukraine. I say breaking all the time without anything. Russia does not want to kill. It is always attacking. It's only attacking where weapons are then. And Russia has the satellite to see the weapons where they are located. Never mind the rhetorics about carnage going on and so on. It is not up to what happened in the northeast in Borno State, or even what is happening in the southeast right now, or north central in Nigeria. It had to do with a double standard. And they said if Russia or Putin could be taken to the ICJ, International Court of Justice, or International Criminal Court, is it as bad as what happened in Iraq? Nobody is talking about George Bush. Nobody is talking about Barack Obama. Nobody is talking of Tony Blair took this invaded Iraq, Syria, Libya, and so on. They have veto powers. It is a waste of time, because apart from veto powers, America doesn't believe in any international court. It has never signed to it to be dragged, to be punished like others. It had always had influence over the verdict. That was how it had the influence of taking away a part of Nigeria called the Bakassi at that time, with the assignment of agreement in Paris at that time, without the consent of the Senate, without a referendum conducted for the people to choose where they wanted to belong. And therefore, politicization of verdict has always been possible with the arm twisting of the big countries there. Therefore, diplomacy for Ukraine is the best alternative, and that all what happened in Ukraine is an eye-opener for the world now. The world, the new world order is real. It has changed movement, and that now people will understand, social media and so on will understand that the figures given in the name of United Nations, the US and so on, they are not real if you go about checking the thing. Imagine a country now of a few million, now by saying over 10 million were now out of Ukraine. How did they get the additional millions and so on? Just to show you that the numbers don't add up at all. And
it's at that point that we're going to have to leave it, Prof. Prof, I want to thank you.
Yes, my dear.
Thank you so much for your views. Obviously, these are very unique positions that you've taken. Quite a lot of people didn't have this information, and we're happy that you are able to disseminate them here on Channels Television. Professor Khalifa Dikwa is of the Department of Linguistics, International Relations and Intelligence at the University of Maiduguri. We'll take a break on the program. We'll be right back with more after this. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back. Oil prices extended their gains this morning as some European Union members discussed a potential embargo on Russia, and attacks on Saudi facilities sent jitters through the market. Front month West Texas Intermediate futures were up $2.20 or 1.96% to $114.32 a barrel. On NYMEX, and Brent futures were up $3.18 or 2.75%. To $118.80 a barrel on the Intercontinental Exchange. Both contracts had settled up more than 7% yesterday as the potential for more supply disruptions weighed the market. So to talk about that and other business impact stories, I have Laddie Williams joining me. Laddie.
Good morning, Laddie.
It seems as if for the last couple of days is this oil prices thing.
It's oil again.
I have someone who, immediately I finish with the program, gets in touch on the phone and says, anytime you guys start with this discussion about prices, I wins, because we ought to be benefiting from this, but unfortunately we're not able to. I was reading something about the fact that Nigeria is not even able to produce up to its OPEC quota, talk less of increase to make up some of the shortfall that is occurring on the market. But one of the things that has come out, of course, is that all attempts to make other countries fill the gap that is going to be created if Russian oil is taken off the market. Saudi Arabia, which is the biggest producer, says he cannot do it.
Exactly, because, you know, obviously they had a stellar last year.
Yeah, you were talking about Aramco yesterday.
Aramco.
Yes.
So, you know, they are trying to step up production at this point to see how they can actually bridge, you know, this gap, you know, with the Russian oil actually out of the market. And obviously we see Europe is mulling, you know, removing dependence, you know, from, you know, Russian oil and gas at this point. And so Aramco, they're trying to ramp up production at this point, but now they're being attacked. You see their, you know, oil production facilities being attacked at this point by Houthi rebels.
You're talking now about the war in Yemen, which is a separate
Exactly, that's another thing. And, you know, an analyst I actually spoke to said, you know what, if this attack on the Saudi Arabia oil production actually escalates, this could drive oil even higher. You know, this point.
Because at the same time as Russia, then you have Saudi oil also being affected.
Exactly, and it's funny because now we see Europe looking for options at this point. Saudi Arabia is a candidate, but now they're also having problems, you know, with their, you know, facilities being attacked. So if that actually escalates, we could see oil hitting up to $300. That's what an analyst actually told me, and that would be incredibly scary, you know, because right now we're already seeing the impact of rising energy prices. Everything is going up. And now we see, obviously, with the fertilizer, there is natural gas actually goes into the production of fertilizer.
Absolutely.
And now we're seeing, you know, fertilizer hitting new highs at this point, which is bad for farmers globally.
Indeed.
And that is actually...
Maybe that could be, of course, mitigated to somewhat by what is happening in Lagos today. The president is expected to open the Dangote fertilizer plant today in Lagos. Perhaps that could offer, if this scenario we're painting actually comes to be, the record prices even going higher. You know, it could provide some mitigation, perhaps.
Exactly, perhaps, you know, but it remains to be seen, you know, how much, you know, production, you know, we see that from Dangote's fertilizer plant, you know, how that's able to shore up the disruption we're seeing, you know, right now with fertilizer, because obviously Russia, you know, this war actually opened my eyes to how much, you know, Russia actually produces. For the world, and how, you know, reliant some continents are on Russia, you know, at this point. Now we see Russia is actually a big supplier of fertilizer, and we see also Belarus also produce potash, which is, you know, used in the production of fertilizer. And, you know, these two countries are being sanctioned, you know, production, you know, being disrupted. So it's impacting, you know, everybody at this point. Now, farmers, obviously, we're already seeing soaring commodity prices. Farmers are already suffering, you know, and now farmers will now suffer from, you know, rising fertilizer prices.
Because that's one of the main inputs into the production process.
Production of food. So, you know, food security is being threatened by this war at this point.
Something that will, of course, has come to Nigeria too. I see that Egypt is setting a fixed price for bread in order to avoid chaos or any kind of discontent. But how sustainable is that, do you think?
Because right now it's costing Egypt about $5.5 billion to, you know, subsidize bread in their country. And obviously they are the biggest importers of wheat, you know, and with this disruption now with wheat production, that's going to increase, and rising cost of wheat will now increase that subsidy at about a few more billions of dollars,
possibly.
you know, on that subsidies. So, you know, obviously we know Egyptians don't play with their bread. You know, the last time we saw price increases in bread, we saw
the riots,
riots.
A lot of discontent displayed on the streets.
They don't want that to come again. So now they're looking at, you know, how they can make this subsidy actually work for the country. We've seen the price of a loaf of bread in Egypt has gone up about 50%, you know, at this point. So they're already feeling the pinch at this point. And the funny thing is, I actually asked my wife, I said, honey, how much do you buy bread? She said 700 naira. I said, wow, I thought it used to be like 500. So even here in Nigeria, we're feeling, you know, obviously because rising cost of diesel.
That's right.
I had a baker on Business Morning last time, and he lamented how, you know, how
the price of milk, the price of sugar, the price, I mean, everything.
Yeah, so it's, Socrates says, any statesman that doesn't care about wheat is not serious.
And it's not likely to last long.
Exactly.
Now, as everybody's rushing for the exits from Russia, Renault is going back there.
Yeah.
I guess there's some strategy to that.
Yeah, because they actually, you know, stopped production of cars in Moscow, you know, due to the disruptions and the war. But they've had to start production all over again because for some reason they are quite invested. Renault, you know, the French maker, they're quite invested in another Russian car brand. That's Avasta. So they have a huge chunk of shares in that company. So they have more to lose if they actually leave Russia following, you know, sanctions.
All this that has happened.
Yeah, if they wanted. So they're actually breaking this trend and say, you know what, we're going to keep producing because we have more to lose if we actually leave Russia at this point. So,
Laddie Williams, more, of course, as always, to unpack on Business Morning and Business Incorporated later on the day. You join Laddie and Ini John McQuarrie for that later in the day. Thank you, Laddie.
Thank you, Laddie.
And just before we go, a predominantly Ukrainian Catholic school in Chicago is welcoming new students who have fled the Russian invasion and calling for peace as the war approaches the one-month mark. The St. Nicholas Cathedral School, located in Chicago's Ukrainian Village, has welcomed 8 students who have left Ukraine in the last few weeks, and administrators claim they're prepared to accommodate 50 more. The students have organized a special prayer vigil, gathering in song and prayer to welcome their new classmates and ask God to protect Ukraine from bringing an end to the invasion. Well, let's try to end on a note of hope. That's Russian invasion this morning. Thank you for being with us throughout its duration. There'll be an update at 5 p.m. with Amar Giovanni and Millicent Walker, and the show will be back tomorrow morning at 9. I'm Laddie Akiri. Do have a good day ahead. Bye.